I've just begun Chesterton's book on Dickens, and in the introduction we find him speaking very nostalgically about the time of reform directly after the French Revolution, and the egalitarianism that spawns great men. And I find it hard to truly understand this. I'm curious as to what Mr. Coulombe has to say about Chesterton regarding his fascination with liberalism.
That's a good question. And the answer is that Chesterton, number one, came from a liberal background, politically, his family. But beyond that, you've got to bear in mind that the British oligarchy, especially agriculturally based oligarchy, that dominated the country from the 1500s into almost the 20th century, losing power successively through the 19th, was based upon the people who took over at the Reformation,
Mm-hmm.
and then who later executed the king. Now, I'm painting in broad strokes.
Right.
But the rights, as that history went on, the rights of the common folk of England were increasingly restricted, especially their economic rights. So, for instance, when you read about Charles I, he was beheaded because he insisted on the royal prerogatives. He wanted to keep bishops in the Church of England. He had negotiated with Rome for a union. These were all things were bad. But what gets left out is the fact that he stood up for the common people against the enclosures. Now, you may not know what these are, but basically, in the Middle Ages, you would have, on every estate, you'd have common land. Now, ostensibly, it belonged to the lord of the manor, but in practice, everybody grazed their animals on it. Now, what the enclosures did, and you needed those animals to survive. You get your own plot where you raise your garden vegetables or whatever you're eating. You work on your lord's fields as well, 30 days of the year. But then you've got your animals that you're dependent upon, goats, sheep, cattle, whatever they are. You're dependent upon them as well for a living. They graze in the common lands, which, as I say, ostensibly belong to the lord of the manor, but practically are used by everybody. Okay. What the enclosures did was that it allowed the landowner to make good on his nominal ownership and enclose them so that you could no longer use them to graze your sheep or whatever, or your cattle. But you know what that had the effect of doing?
What?
It drove people off the land. Because if you can't graze your animals, you don't have it.
Mm.
And you can't survive on vegetables alone.
Okay.
So it drove a lot of people off the land who later on would become the urban proletariat. Their descendants would. They go to the cities. Well, the king stood up against the enclosures, which was, as far as he was concerned, yet another attack on the age-old Constitution of England.
Okay.
Well, as you can imagine, later on, especially because they were dealing with the descendants of that oligarchy, a number of the early Liberal and Labour Party people were very sympathetic to the Stuarts and to the anti-Reformation in general. Not for religious reasons, but for political ones. And it was from that tradition that Chesterton came.
Okay. So we're going to make allowances for him because he came from the time where that was, more understandable.
Absolutely. People are always more understandable in their own context than they are in ours.
Okay.
Just as we're much easier to understand if you live now than if you live at some other time. Why did Catholics go along with abortion and never do anything practical against it? You would have had to have lived then to understand.